Sonara didn't know that the veil covering her face was the only thing standing between her and death. She didn't know that the man waiting at the altar could smell a lie before it left someone's lips. And she definitely didn't know that stepping into her sister's place would bind her to a fate far more dangerous and far more consuming than anything she'd ever imagined. The wedding gown didn't fit. It had been made for Lysara, who was taller, fuller, blessed with the kind of curves that made men write poetry and start wars. Sonara was slighter, sharper, built for work rather than worship. The seamstress had done what she could in the 3 hours since Lysara vanished, but the silk still gaped at the bodice and pooled too long at the feet. "Stop fidgeting." Her father's voice was ice. Lord Caius of Greymore had never been a warm man, but tonight his coldness had edges sharp enough to cut. "You'll walk straight, you'll speak only when spoken to, and you will not, under any circumstances, remove that veil until you're in his chambers." Sonara's stomach turned. "Father, this is madness. He'll know I'm not her." "He's never met her. The negotiations were conducted through envoys. All he knows is that he's receiving a bride from House Greymore as part of the treaty." Caius gripped her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Your sister has abandoned her duty. You will fulfill it in her place, or I will personally deliver you to the king as a traitor and watch you hang." The threat wasn't empty. Sonara had spent 22 years learning exactly what her father was capable of. "Lysara left a note," Sonara whispered. "She said she'd rather die than marry a monster. That's what they call him. The Wolf of Waldmere. They say he's killed more men than the plague. They say They say many things." Her father's expression didn't flicker. "What I know is that this marriage secures our borders, fills our coffers, and keeps our family in power for the next 3 generations. What I know is that your sister is weak, and you are not. So you will do what she could not." Sonara wanted to laugh. She wasn't strong. She was simply invisible. The second daughter, the plain one, the one who managed the household accounts and tended the herb gardens and stayed quiet in corners while Lysara dazzled. She had no suitors, no prospects, no future beyond serving as a spinster aunt to whatever children Lysara eventually produced. Except Lysara was gone, fled in the night with a stable hand she'd apparently been meeting for months. And now Sonara stood in a borrowed dress, about to marry the most feared Alpha King in the 5 kingdoms. The throne room of Waldmere was nothing like she expected. She'd imagined darkness, perhaps, stone walls dripping with torchlight and shadows. Instead, the space soared with vaulted ceilings and windows that caught the dying sunset, flooding everything in amber and gold. It was beautiful. The man at the altar was not. No, that wasn't right. He was beautiful, devastatingly so, but in the way a blade was beautiful. Dark hair fell past his shoulders. His jaw could have been carved from granite, and his eyes, even from across the room, seemed to burn through the delicate lace of her veil. Sonara's legs threatened to buckle. Her father's hand pressed against her lower back, propelling her forward. One step. Another. The assembled witnesses blurred into smears of color. The king didn't move as she approached, didn't smile. His stillness was absolute, predatory, the patience of something that had never needed to chase because everything eventually came to it. She reached the altar, stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the king inhaled slowly, deeply, and his brow furrowed with suspicion, his eyes narrowed. "Look at me," he commanded. Sonara's blood turned to ice. She couldn't. The moment he saw her face, it would all be over. But there was no refusing a direct order from the Alpha King. Her trembling fingers reached for the veil. "I said, look at me." His voice was low, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Leave the veil." Sonara's hand froze mid-motion. The king circled her slowly, the way a predator might circle wounded prey. She felt his gaze moving over her, the ill-fitting gown, the trembling shoulders, the fingers that couldn't quite stay still. "You're afraid," he observed. "Not a question. Any woman would be, Your Majesty." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Any woman." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "But not every woman's fear smells like guilt." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" He leaned closer, inhaling near the curve of her neck, and Sonara suppressed a shiver. "Your heartbeat says otherwise." The priest shifted nervously. "Your Majesty, if we could proceed with the ceremony." "We'll proceed when I say we proceed." The king didn't raise his voice, but the priest shrank back as if struck. Sonara's mind raced. She needed to survive this moment, survive the ceremony, and survive long enough to figure out an escape. Her father's threat echoed. "Watch you hang." "I'm merely anxious," she managed. "This is my wedding day. I've never—" She let the sentence trail off, hoping maidenly nerves would explain what terror could not. The king studied her. In the sunset light, his eyes were the color of molten amber, flecked with something darker. Dangerous. "Your father's letters described a bold woman," he said slowly. "One who rode stallions bareback and entertained suitors by the dozen. A beauty who'd rejected 3 marriage proposals because no man met her standards. That was Lisara. Every word of it." "Perhaps I'm different in person," Sonara said carefully. "Perhaps." He tilted his head. "Or perhaps Lord Caius has been less than truthful about what he's delivering to my doorstep." Before she could respond, his fingers caught her chin, lifting it with surprising gentleness. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through her, something electric that made her breath catch. "Last chance," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "Tell me the truth now, and I might be merciful. Lie to me, and I'll discover it eventually. I always do." Sonara's throat constricted. Every instinct screamed at her to confess, to throw herself on his mercy, to explain that she'd had no choice. But mercy was a concept for men who weren't called the Wolf of Valdemir. "I am your bride," she said, as promised. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. "So be it." He released her chin and turned to the priest. "Proceed." The ceremony passed in a blur. Sonara spoke the vows she'd memorized on the carriage ride, her voice hollow. The king's responses were perfunctory, almost bored. When it came time to seal the marriage with a kiss, he merely brushed his lips against her veil, the barest whisper of contact. Then it was done. She was married to a stranger, a monster. A king who somehow knew she was lying even if he couldn't yet prove it. The feast afterward was torture. Sonara sat at the high table, painfully aware of every eye in the room, every whispered speculation. The nobles of Valdemir assessed her like merchants examining questionable goods. The king sat beside her, eating little, drinking less, his attention never quite leaving her. "You've barely touched your food," he observed. "I'm not hungry." "Eat anyway. You'll need your strength." The words could have been threat or promise. She couldn't tell which. Hours later, when the feast finally ended, a servant escorted her to the royal chambers. The room was vast, dominated by a bed that could have held 6 people comfortably. Candles flickered everywhere, casting dancing shadows. Sonara stood frozen in the center of the room, still in her wedding gown, still veiled. The door opened. The king entered. And for the first time, they were completely alone. He crossed the room slowly, stopping an arm's length away. Then, before she could react, his hand rose and pulled the veil from her face. His eyes widened. "You," he breathed, "are not Lisara of Greymore." Sonara's world collapsed into the space between heartbeats. She waited for the rage, for the roar of fury, the summoning of guards, the pronouncement of her death sentence. She'd heard stories of the Alpha King's temper, swift, brutal, absolute. Instead, he simply stared at her. "No," she whispered. "I'm not." "Who are you?" "Sanara, her sister." The words felt like shards of glass leaving her throat. Lysara fled on the eve of the wedding. My father forced me to take her place. I had no choice. "Please, Your Majesty, I—" "Stop." He held up a hand and she fell silent instantly. "Your father, Lord Caius. He orchestrated this deception?" "Yes." "And you agreed?" Sanara's laugh was brittle. "Agreement implies I had options. My father made it clear. Substitute for Lysara or hang as a traitor. Not much of a choice." The king's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing, his gaze roaming her face as if cataloging every feature, comparing her to the sister he'd expected. "You look nothing like her," he said finally. "I'm aware." Sanara had spent a lifetime being aware of exactly how she paled beside Lysara's golden radiance. Where her sister was sunlight, Sanara was shadow, dark-haired, gray-eyed, and forgettable. We share a father, not a mother, different in every way that matters. And yet you stood at my altar, spoke vows, let me bind myself to a lie. The accusation stung more than it should have. Would you have preferred I let my father kill me? Sanara's fear was curdling into something sharper. Should I have thrown myself at your feet in front of 300 witnesses and announced the deception? That would have humiliated you publicly, broken the treaty, and started a war. At least this way. At least this way. What? His voice dropped, dangerous. You thought I wouldn't notice? That I'd consummate the marriage and discover my bride was the wrong woman in the morning light? Heat flooded her cheeks. I didn't think that far ahead. I was trying to survive the next 5 minutes. Recognition sparked behind his eyes, tinged with something almost like respect. Survival, he repeated quietly. Yes, I suppose I understand that motivation. He turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the moonlit mountains. The tension in his shoulders was visible even from across the room. I should annul this marriage immediately, he said. Expose your father's treachery, demand compensation for the insult. Yes. Sanara's voice was barely audible. You should. If I do, you'll be executed. Greymoor's treaty with Valdemir will collapse. My enemies, and I have many, will see weakness. They'll strike before the month is out. He paused. Thousands will die. The weight of it pressed down on her. She'd understood the stakes intellectually, but hearing him lay them out so plainly made her knees weak. What happens now? She asked. The king turned back to face her. In the candlelight, the harsh planes of his face seemed almost vulnerable. I haven't decided yet. He crossed the room again, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. This time, when his fingers caught her chin, the touch was different. Firm, possessive, claiming. Sanara of Greymoor, he said slowly, as if testing the name. The invisible sister, the one nobody notices. You've heard of me? Surprise colored her voice. I make it my business to know everything about the families I deal with. His thumb traced her jawline with deliberate pressure. You manage your father's accounts. You've prevented him from bankrupting Greymoor at least twice with your careful management. You breed medicinal herbs that have saved lives during 3 separate plague outbreaks. Her breath caught. No one had ever bothered to learn those things about her. Not even her own family acknowledged her contributions. You're wasted in your father's house, the king continued. Invisible, as you said. But I see you. His grip on her chin tightened slightly, tilting her face up until she had nowhere to look but directly into his piercing amber stare. And, now that you're here, standing in my castle, bound by vows you can't take back, His voice dropped to something low and possessive. You're mine. The word sent a shiver down her spine. Not entirely from fear. What do you want from me? She whispered. A choice. He released her chin but didn't step back. I can expose the deception now and watch everything burn, or we can maintain this fiction. You remain my wife. Publicly, at least. You help me navigate the political storm that's coming. And in return, I protect you from your father, give you a position of actual power, and when the time is right, we annul quietly and you're free. And privately? Privately, we're strangers who happen to share a castle. His expression was unreadable. I won't touch you, won't demand anything you're not willing to give. This would be an alliance, not a true marriage. Sonara's mind spun. It was more than she'd dared hope for. A chance at survival. Even a chance at freedom eventually. Why would you offer this? She studied his face for the trap. You could simply kill me and demand another bride from my father, one who's actually Lysera. Because your father would just find another way to deceive me. At least with you, I know exactly what I'm getting. His smile was thin, humorless. And because anyone brave enough to walk into the wolf's den deserves a fighting chance to walk out again. She should refuse, should demand to know the catch, the hidden cost, the inevitable betrayal. Instead, she heard herself say, How long? 1 year. Help me survive the challenges ahead, and I'll give you enough gold to disappear anywhere in the 5 kingdoms. New name, new life, no connection to Greymore or Valdemir. 1 year as a false queen. 1 year beside the most dangerous man she'd ever met. 1 year to earn her freedom. And if I refuse? Then I call the guards and we both face the consequences. His eyes held hers. But I don't think you'll refuse. You're a survivor, Sonara. Like. Recognizes like. He extended his hand. Not for a handshake, for something older. A clasp of forearms, the way warriors sealed oaths. Sonara looked at his hand, then at his face, and despite every instinct screaming that this was a mistake, she reached out and gripped his arm. The moment their skin touched, something sparked between them. Not painful, but startling, a recognition that seemed to resonate in her very bones. The king's eyes widened slightly. He felt it too. But before either of them could speak, a knock shattered the moment. Your Majesty. A voice from beyond the door, urgent. Forgive the interruption. There's been an attack on the eastern border. Lord Malachar demands an audience immediately. The king's expression hardened into something cold and lethal. It begins, he murmured. Then, louder. I'll be there shortly. He looked at Sonara one last time. Rest tonight, wife. Tomorrow you'll learn exactly what kind of storm you've agreed to weather. He strode from the room, leaving her alone with the dying candles and the echo of that impossible spark still humming beneath her skin. Sonara didn't sleep. She paced the chambers until the candles burned low, her mind churning through every possible outcome. By dawn, exhaustion had hollowed her out, but answers remained elusive. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. My lady? A woman's voice, gentle but firm. His Majesty requests your presence in the War Council. I'm Velith, your lady's maid. Sonara opened the door to find a woman perhaps 10 years her senior, with kind eyes and silver threading through auburn hair. Unlike the servants at Greymore who scurried and avoided eye contact, Velith met her gaze directly. War Council? Sonara repeated. The border attack last night. Lord Malachar's forces killed 30 of our men. Velith's expression tightened. The king wants his wife present. His wife. The word felt like borrowed clothing that didn't quite fit. Velith helped her into a gown of deep emerald. Apparently the former queen's wardrobe had been prepared for Lysara, but the seamstresses had worked through the night making alterations. This dress fit perfectly, hugging curves Sonara hadn't known she possessed. You look like a queen. Velith said quietly. Now you must act like one. The war council chamber was already crowded when Sonara entered. 24 men stood around a massive table covered in maps, their voices a low rumble of argument. The moment she appeared, silence fell. Every eye turned to her. Sonara's spine stiffened. She'd spent her life being invisible. Being seen was a different kind of terror. Then Calyx was beside her, his hand finding the small of her back with surprising naturalness. The touch steadied her more than it should have. My wife, he announced. She'll be joining all council sessions moving forward. Murmurs rippled through the room. Not all of them sounded pleased. Your Majesty, an older man with a gray beard spoke up. With respect, matters of war are hardly appropriate for... For what, Lord Brennick? Calyx's voice could have frozen fire. For the Queen of Valdmere? For the woman whose family's alliance secures our southern border while we deal with threats from the east? Lord Brennick's mouth snapped shut. Calyx guided Sonara to a chair beside his own, then addressed the room. Report. A younger man, tall, dark-skinned, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, stepped forward. Lord Malakar's forces struck our garrison at Thornwatch. 30 dead, provisions burned, and they left a message carved into the commander's chest. Sonara's stomach turned. What message? Calyx asked. The false king bleeds next. The room erupted. Voices clashed, accusations flew, and through it all, Calyx remained utterly still. Sonara watched him absorb the chaos, his face revealing nothing. Finally, he raised a hand. Silence returned instantly. Malakar has contested my rule since I took the throne, Calyx said. He believes his bloodline is superior, that I'm a usurper. This attack isn't random. It's a declaration. He looked around the table. What he doesn't know is that I've been expecting it. He gestured to the scarred man, who Sonara realized must be his commander. Gavrin, show them. Gavrin unrolled a second map, this one marked with symbols Sonara didn't recognize. We've had scouts tracking Malakar's movements for 6 months, Gavrin explained. He's been building alliances, stockpiling weapons, recruiting mercenaries. Our estimates suggest he'll have enough forces to march on Valdmere within 3 months. Dread pooled in Sonara's stomach. 3 months. Which is why the Greymore alliance was essential, Calyx continued. His eyes found Sonara's. With your father's forces securing the south, I can redirect my armies east without leaving our flank exposed. Suddenly, she understood. This wasn't just a political marriage. It was military strategy. Without Greymore, Valdmere would be fighting on 2 fronts. A war they couldn't win. And she was the linchpin holding it all together. My father will honor the treaty, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. His ambition exceeds his honor, but not his cowardice. He fears Malakar's expansion more than he fears you. A few lords exchanged glances at her bluntness, but Calyx smiled, a small, genuine thing that transformed his face. It seems my queen understands politics better than most of my council. The meeting continued for another hour. Sonara listened, absorbed, catalogued. By the end, she understood exactly how precarious Calyx's position was. He was a young king surrounded by older lords who resented his power, facing an enemy who wanted his throne, and now saddled with a wife who was living proof that his allies would deceive him without hesitation. When the council finally dispersed, Calyx caught her arm. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. He led her through corridors she didn't recognize, up a spiraling staircase, until they emerged onto a balcony overlooking the mountains. The view stole her breath. Endless peaks capped with snow, the morning sun painting everything gold and rose. This is where I come to think, Calyx said quietly. No one else knows about it. Why show me? He turned to face her, and the mask of the cold king had slipped. In its place stood someone younger, wearier, and almost vulnerable. Because I need you to understand what you've agreed to. He gripped the stone railing. Malachar isn't just my enemy. He's my uncle. My father's brother. He believes the throne should have passed to him, not to me. Sonara stared. Your own family? Family means nothing to men who want power. Bitterness edged his words. He killed my father, poisoned him slowly over months while pretending to be his closest advisor. By the time anyone realized, it was too late. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. I was 19 when I took the throne, Calix continued. 19, grieving, surrounded by men who saw a boy playing at being king. I've spent 6 years proving them wrong, building strength, forming alliances, preparing for the war I knew Malachar would eventually bring. He looked at her. And now you're part of that war, whether you wanted to be or not. I didn't choose this, Sonara whispered. Neither did I. His laugh was hollow. But here we are. She studied his profile, the tension in his jaw, the shadows beneath his eyes. This man carried a kingdom on his shoulders, and he was utterly alone. What do you need from me? She asked. Truly? Calix was quiet for a long moment. I need someone I can trust. Someone who doesn't want my crown, my power, or my destruction. His amber gaze found hers, intense and searching. Can you be that person, Sonara? The question hung between them, weighted with everything unspoken. I don't know yet, she answered honestly. But I'm willing to try. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. That's more than most have offered. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was unexpectedly tender, and Sonara felt that strange spark again, the one from last night, humming beneath her skin. Before she could examine it further, Calix stepped back. Gavrin will brief you on Malachar's key allies. Study them. Learn their weaknesses. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. You noticed things in that council room that my lords missed. I'd like to know what else you see. He left her on the balcony, surrounded by mountains and sky, with the weight of a kingdom settling onto her shoulders alongside his trust. It felt terrifying. It also felt like the first real purpose she'd ever had. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Mornings, Sonara attended council meetings, sitting silently at first but gradually offering observations that made the lords shift uncomfortably in their seats. She had a gift for patterns, for seeing connections others missed, a skill honed through years of managing Greymoor's chaotic finances. Afternoons, Gavrin educated her on Valdmir's enemies. The commander had been skeptical at first, clearly questioning why his king bothered with a substitute bride from a treacherous house. But Sonara won him over with questions that proved she'd actually studied the maps, actually remembered the names, actually cared about understanding the threats. You're not what I expected, Gavrin admitted one afternoon, rolling up a map of Malachar's territory. What did you expect? Another empty-headed noble playing at politics until she gets bored. He shrugged. Instead, I got someone who memorized our entire Eastern Defense Network in 3 days. I have a good memory. You have a strategist's mind. Gavrin studied her with newfound respect. The king chose well, even if he didn't know what he was choosing. Evenings were harder. Protocol demanded that she and Calix dine together, maintain appearances, and present a united front. The castle watched their every interaction with hungry eyes, searching for cracks in the facade. So they performed. Calix would touch her hand across the table, lean close to whisper something that made her smile, usually dry observations about whichever lord was currently making a fool of himself. Sonara learned to laugh at the right moments, to meet his eyes with warmth she was surprised to discover wasn't entirely feigned. You're getting better at this, he murmured one evening, his breath warm against her ear. At pretending to adore you? At pretending you don't. His smile held a hint of wickedness. The blush is a nice touch. She kicked him under the table. He laughed, genuine and startled, and several courtiers exchanged knowing looks. Knights, they retreated to separate chambers. True to his word, Calix never pressed, never demanded. He'd transformed a sitting room into her private space, complete with books, a writing desk, and a window seat overlooking the gardens. "For your plotting," he'd said when he showed her. "Queens don't plot. The good ones do." She'd smiled despite herself, but not everyone welcomed her presence. Lady Corvina of House Ashford made her displeasure known through cutting remarks disguised as compliments and a constant presence at Calix's side. She was everything Sonara wasn't: golden-haired, elegant, with connections to half the noble houses in Valdemere. "It must be so difficult," Corvina purred during a garden gathering. "Coming from such a modest background. Greymore is charming, of course, but hardly preparation for queenship." "You're right," Sonara replied sweetly. "At Greymore, we focused on useful skills, managing estates, preventing bankruptcy, that sort of thing. I imagine it's quite different here, where ladies have leisure for more decorative pursuits." Corvina's smile turned brittle. "How refreshing. A queen who knows about ledgers." "Someone has to." Sonara sipped her wine. "I understand the previous administration left quite a mess. The king's late mother was more interested in parties than accounts, wasn't she?" "Such a shame." The barb landed. Corvina's mother had been the late queen's closest friend, both notorious for their extravagance. But the victory felt hollow when Sonara caught Velith's worried expression later. "You've made an enemy there, my lady." "She was already my enemy. Now she's just certain of it." "Lady Corvina is connected to Lord Malachar." Velith's voice dropped. "Through her mother's line. There are whispers that she was meant to be Calix's queen before the Greymore alliance was proposed." A chill shot through Sonara. She wanted to marry him? She wanted to be queen. There's a difference. Velith hesitated. "My lady, I shouldn't say this, but be careful. Corvina isn't just petty. She's dangerous. And she has allies in this castle who would love to see you fail." That night, Sonara couldn't sleep. She found herself wandering the corridors, eventually ending up in the library, a vast chamber filled with more books than she'd seen in her entire life. She was reaching for a history of Valdemere's succession wars when a voice made her jump. "Can't sleep either." Calix sat in a shadowed alcove, a glass of wine in hand, looking nothing like a king. His shirt was untucked, his hair disheveled, and exhaustion lined his face. "I was looking for something to read." She hesitated. "I could leave." "Stay." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I could use the company." She settled into the seat, acutely aware of how different this was from their public performances. Here, there was no audience, just two people who couldn't sleep. "What keeps you awake?" she asked. "Reports from the border. Malachar's movements. The usual nightmares." He took a long drink. "You?" "Lady Corvina." Sonara paused. "Velith told me she has connections to Malachar." Calix's expression darkened. "She does. Her mother was his lover before she married Lord Ashford. There's speculation that Corvina might actually be Malachar's daughter." Sonara's eyes widened. "And you let her stay at court? Keep your enemies close." He smiled grimly. "Besides, I have no proof. Just suspicions. She hates me." "She hates that you're in the position she wanted." Calix set down his glass. "Corvina sees the throne as her birthright. Stolen first by my mother, then by this alliance. You're a symbol of everything she's lost." "Then why not just—" Sonara made a vague gesture. "Eliminate her?" Calix's laugh was humorless. "Because she's too well connected. Moving against her without proof would turn half the court against me." He leaned forward. "But if she makes a move first, If she exposes herself, then you could act. Then I could act. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Calix spoke again, softer this time. You've done well these past weeks, better than anyone expected. Including you. Including me, he admitted. I thought you'd crumble. Most would have. Instead, you've memorized defense networks, won over my commander, and made Corvina look like a fool in public. She made herself look like a fool? I just helped. His laugh was genuine this time. See that. That's why you're dangerous. Dangerous? Sonara raised an eyebrow. You see clearly. You speak truth. And you don't cower. His eyes met hers, warm in the low light. In a court full of sycophants and schemers, that makes you the most dangerous person here. The compliment settled into her chest, glowing. I should go, she said, standing. Try to sleep. Calix rose too, catching her hand before she could leave. Sonara. Her name in his mouth did strange things to her heartbeat. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, I'm glad you're the one who walked down that aisle. She didn't know what to say. So she squeezed his hand once, then fled to her chambers, her pulse racing. She was in trouble. Real trouble. Because somewhere between the strategy sessions and the whispered dinners and the late-night conversations, she'd started to feel something for her false husband. And that wasn't part of the plan at all. The letter arrived on a gray morning, 3 weeks after the wedding. Sonara was breaking her fast in her chambers when Velith entered, face pale, holding a sealed envelope like it might bite her. This came through unofficial channels, Velith said carefully. No one knows but me. The seal was unfamiliar, a serpent eating its own tail. Sonara broke it with trembling fingers. The words inside made her world tilt sideways. Dearest sister, by now you've settled into your gilded cage. I hope the wolf treats you well. Better than he would have treated me, certainly. I want you to understand why I left. Not out of cowardice, as Father surely claimed, but out of knowledge. Did they tell you why Malachar wants the throne? Did they explain what your precious king did to earn such hatred? Ask him about Thornfeld. Ask him what happened to the village, to the people, to the children. Ask him why the wolf earned his name. I couldn't marry a monster, Sonara. I loved you too much to warn you. Father was watching everything. But perhaps this letter can reach you now that I'm safely beyond his grasp. The man you've bound yourself to isn't a victim. He's a butcher. Forgive me someday. Your sister, Lysara Sonara, read the letter 3 times. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. My lady? Velith's voice seemed distant. What does it say? Where is Thornfeld? Velith's face went ashen. My lady. Where is it? A long pause. It was a village. 50 miles east. It doesn't exist anymore. What happened to it? Velith looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. That's a question for the king. Sonara found Calix in the training yard, sparring with Gavrin. He moved like violence made beautiful, all coiled power and lethal precision. When he saw her face, he stopped mid-strike. Leave us, he told Gavrin. The commander took one look at Sonara's expression and departed without a word. Calix approached her slowly, sweat gleaming on his brow. What's wrong? She thrust the letter at him, watched his face as he read it, watched the color drain away, leaving something hollow behind. Where did you get this? Does it matter? Her voice cracked. Is it true? Sonara. Thornfeld. What happened there? Calix closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were haunted. It was 2 years into my reign. Malachar had been raiding border villages, killing indiscriminately, trying to destabilize my rule. My advisors said I needed to send a message, that if I appeared weak, more villages would burn. What message? She whispered. Malachar had a base of operations, a village that sheltered his forces, supplied them, hid them from my scouts. Calix's voice was hollow. My generals recommended a surgical strike, eliminate the military threat, capture the collaborators. What I didn't know, what I didn't bother to verify, was that most of Malakar's forces had already moved on. When we attacked, he stopped, swallowed hard. There were mostly civilians left. Families. The soldiers who executed my orders didn't distinguish between combatants and innocents. His hands clenched. 47 people died, including children, and it was my command that made it possible. Sonara felt sick. You killed children. My orders killed them. I didn't wield the sword, but I gave the word. He met her eyes, and she saw genuine anguish there. I've lived with it every day since. Changed my protocols, executed the officers who exceeded their orders, tried to make reparations to the survivors, but nothing brings back the dead. And Malakar? He uses Thornfeld as his rallying cry, proof that I'm a tyrant, a murderer, unfit to rule. Calyx laughed bitterly. He's not wrong. About that at least. Sonara's mind spun. The man before her, the one who'd shown her vulnerability, who'd trusted her with secrets, who'd made her feel seen for the first time in her life, was also responsible for the deaths of innocent children. Why didn't you tell me? When was I supposed to? On our wedding night? During council meetings? He ran a hand through his hair. I'm not proud of what happened, but I won't hide from it either. Every decision I've made since has been about becoming someone worthy of the crown, someone who doesn't make those mistakes again. And that's supposed to make it better? No. His voice was raw. Nothing makes it better, but I can try to make the future different. They stared at each other across the training yard. Sonara felt the ground shifting beneath everything she'd begun to believe. My sister warned me, she said finally, tried to save me from you. Maybe she was right to. Don't. The word came out sharper than intended. Don't make yourself the villain so I can hate you cleanly. It's more complicated than that. Is it? You were 19, surrounded by advisors who used your inexperience, manipulated into a decision that haunts you still. She pressed a hand to her temple. I'm not excusing it, but I'm also not going to pretend it's simple. Calyx stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. Most people would run after learning this. I'm not most people. She took a shaky breath. I need time to think, to process. But I'm not running. Not yet. Why? Because you're the first person who ever made me feel like more than a shadow. Because I've seen the weight you carry and I know it's real. Because despite everything, I still feel that spark when you touch me. She didn't say any of that. Because I made a promise, she said instead. 1 year. I don't break my word. Calyx's expression cracked, revealing something painfully raw beneath. Sonara, don't. She held up a hand. Not yet. I need space. She turned and walked away before he could see the tears sliding down her cheeks. In her chambers, she burned Lysara's letter and watched the ashes crumble. Her sister had tried to save her. But Lysara didn't know everything. Didn't know about the spark, the connection, the way Calyx looked at her like she was the first real thing he'd seen in years. Sonara wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. All she knew was that she'd bound herself to a man with blood on his hands. And despite everything, she wasn't ready to let go. 3 days passed in silence. Sonara attended council meetings, studied maps with Gavrin, and performed her duties as queen. But she didn't seek Calyx out, and he didn't push. The distance between them felt like a physical wound, one she'd inflicted, one she wasn't sure how to heal. On the 4th night, sleep refused to come. She found herself walking the corridors again, feet carrying her toward the balcony without conscious decision. Their spot. She'd started thinking of it. The place where he'd first shown her something real. Calyx was already there. He stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid, silhouetted against a sky full of stars. He didn't turn when she approached, but she saw his hands tighten on the railing. "I wondered if you'd come," he said quietly. "I almost didn't." Silence stretched between them. Then Sonara moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel his warmth, but not quite touching. "I've been thinking," she said, "about Thornfeld, about you, about what it means to be responsible for something terrible." Calyx finally looked at her. The moonlight revealed exhaustion carved into every line of his face, and "My father sold my sister to a stranger for political gain. When she fled, he forced me to take her place under threat of death. He's never killed anyone directly, but he's destroyed lives without hesitation." Sonara took a breath. "I used to think evil was simple. Monsters did monstrous things. Good people didn't. And now? Now I think it's more complicated. People make terrible choices for complicated reasons. Some of them feel remorse. Some try to do better." She turned to face him fully. "You're not the same man who gave that order 4 years ago. I've watched you lead. You agonize over every decision, every potential cost. You listen to voices others would silence. You're trying." Calyx's expression cracked. "Trying doesn't bring back the dead." "No, but it might save the living." She reached out, her fingers finding his. "I'm not saying I've forgiven what happened. I'm saying I understand that you haven't forgiven yourself either. And I'm saying—" She hesitated. "I'm saying I'd rather stand beside someone who carries his guilt like a weight than someone who feels nothing at all." His hand turned, fingers interlacing with hers. "You should hate me." "Probably." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "I've never been good at doing what I should." Calyx's laugh was broken, almost a sob. "Sonara, I don't deserve—" "Don't tell me what you deserve. Let me decide that for myself." She stepped closer, eliminating the distance between them. His free hand rose to cup her face, trembling slightly. "I've wanted to touch you for weeks," he breathed. "Every dinner, every performance, every moment we pretended." "I wasn't pretending. Neither was I." The confession hung between them, electric and terrifying. "If I kiss you now," Calyx said, his voice rough, "I won't be able to pretend it means nothing." "Then don't pretend." He closed the distance. The kiss was everything and nothing like she'd imagined. Soft at first, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, when she pressed closer and fisted her hands in his shirt, something broke loose in him. He kissed her like a man drowning, like she was air and salvation and home all at once. Her back met the stone railing. His hands framed her face, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. Every nerve ending sparked, that strange bond between them flaring bright and undeniable. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, Calyx pressed his forehead to hers. "You're mine," he whispered. But the words that had sounded like possession on their wedding night now sounded like a vow. "Tell me you're mine. I'm yours." The truth of it resonated in her bones. "I'm yours." He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. "Come to my chambers," he murmured against her lips. "Not for anything you're not ready for. Just stay with me tonight. Let me hold you." "Yes." They walked hand in hand through the sleeping castle. For the first time since the wedding, the distance between them had finally collapsed into something real. Sonara fell asleep in his arms, listening to his heartbeat, feeling safer than she had in years. She should have known it couldn't last. The screaming woke her. Sonara bolted upright, disoriented. Calyx was already on his feet, pulling on clothes, a dagger appearing in his hand from somewhere. "Stay here," he commanded. "What's happening?" But he was already gone. Sonara dressed quickly, ignoring his order. The corridors were chaos, servants running, guards shouting, the acrid smell of smoke burning her throat and stinging her eyes. Heat radiated from somewhere deeper in the castle, pulsing like a living thing. She found Velith in the hallway, face white with terror. "My lady, you must hide. There's been a breach." "Where's the king?" "The eastern wing. There's a fire and they're saying—" Velith's voice broke. "They're saying Malakar's forces are inside the walls." Impossible. The castle was a fortress. Unless someone had opened the gates from within. Her veins turned cold. Corvina. She ran toward the eastern wing, ignoring Velith's pleas. Smoke thickened as she drew closer, billowing in ashen clouds that made her eyes water and her lungs burn. Flames licked the tapestries, devouring centuries of history in hungry gulps. The roar of the fire was punctuated by screams and the clash of steel. Guards fighting shadowed figures in brutal close combat. The heat pressed against her skin like a physical force, and somewhere in the distance, glass shattered. She found Gavrin near the great hall, bleeding from a gash on his arm but still directing defenses. His voice cut through the chaos, steady despite the crimson soaking through his sleeve. "Where is he?" she demanded. "The queen should be—" "Where is he?" Gavrin's jaw tightened. Corvina sent a message claiming she had information about Malakar's plan. Requested a private audience in the old tower. His expression darkened. It was a trap. By the time we realized, the gates were already open. The old tower. Sonara knew it from her late-night wanderings, an abandoned section of the castle, far from help. She ran. The tower stairs seemed endless, spiraling upward into darkness, broken only by the occasional guttering torch. Smoke curled up from below like grasping fingers, and the distant screams echoed off stone walls. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Every instinct told her that she should turn back. Find safety. Let the soldiers handle this. But Calyx was up there, alone. Walking into a trap she might have prevented if she'd paid closer attention to Corvina's schemes. She reached the top, breathless and trembling. The scene froze her heart. Calyx knelt on the stone floor, a sword pressed to his throat. Corvina stood behind him, her beautiful face twisted with triumph, firelight dancing in her golden hair. And beside her, a man with Calyx's eyes. Older, crueler, with silver threading through dark hair and a smile that held no warmth at all. Malakar. "Ah," Malakar said pleasantly, watching Sonara's horrified entrance. "The false bride. I'd hoped you might join us." "Run!" Calyx snarled. "Sonara, run!" But two guards were already grabbing her arms, dragging her forward. Their grips were iron, bruising, and impossible to break. Malakar studied her with cold amusement. "You know, I was furious when I learned Caius had substituted his daughters. All that planning, all those bribes, and the bride we'd spent months preparing Corvina to replace turns out to be someone else entirely." "You knew about the substitution?" Sonara's mind raced. "Who do you think helped Lysara escape?" Corvina's laugh was poison. "We needed chaos, needed your father's treachery exposed so we could position me as the rightful queen after the annulment." She stroked Calyx's hair mockingly, and Sonara saw him flinch. "But you complicated things, didn't you? Made him actually care about his false little wife." "Don't touch her." The command in Calyx's voice was absolute, even on his knees with steel at his throat. "Whatever you want, take it from me. Leave her out of this." Malakar smiled. "How touching. The Butcher of Thornfeld has a heart after all." "What do you want?" Sonara demanded. "Isn't it obvious? The throne. My brother stole it from me when he married that common whore and produced an heir. Now I'm simply correcting the mistake." Malakar drew his own sword, the blade catching the torchlight. "Kill the usurper, execute his foreign wife for her family's treachery, and let Corvina comfort the grieving kingdom as their new queen." "The lords will never accept you," Calyx said. "They'll accept whoever feeds them. and Corvina is quite persuasive when she wants to be. Sonara watched the blade rise, watched Malakar's eyes gleam with anticipation, and something inside her snapped. Wait. The word left her mouth before she could stop it. Malakar's blade paused mid-swing. The girl wants to negotiate? He sounded amused. Speak quickly. Sonara's mind raced. She had no weapons, no fighting skills, nothing but words and the desperate need to buy time. You're making a mistake, she said. Not about Calyx. About Corvina. Corvina stiffened. Ignore her. She's stalling. Am I? Sonara forced calm into her voice, channeling every lesson she'd learned about reading people, finding weaknesses, exploiting them. You said it yourself. You helped Lysara escape, which means you've been planning this for months. But there's something you didn't account for. And what's that? The documents I found in Corvina's chambers. Corvina paled. She's lying. There are no documents. No? Sonara met her eyes steadily. The letters to your mother's contacts in the Eastern Territories. The financial records showing payments from Malakar's treasury. The draft of the speech you planned to give once Calyx was dead. The one where you eventually position yourself as sole ruler, without any need for a regent uncle. Malakar's sword lowered slightly. His gaze swung to Corvina. What is she talking about? She's inventing stories, desperate lies. Then you won't mind if we search your chambers after this. Sonara kept her voice level. I'm sure we won't find anything. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Then Malakar laughed. A cold, ugly sound. You think I didn't know? He turned to Corvina, and his smile was terrifying. Of course the ambitious little wretch planned to betray me eventually, but she was useful. She got me inside these walls. Corvina's face went white. My lord, I never... The difference between you and me, child, is that I don't need accomplices. Malakar raised his sword again, but this time it was pointed at Corvina. Thank you for your service. Corvina screamed as the blade swung. In that moment of chaos, everything happened at once. Calyx wrenched free from his distracted captor, driving an elbow into the man's throat. Sonara twisted violently, biting the hand of the guard holding her, tasting blood. Somewhere below, she heard shouting. Gavrin's voice, calling for reinforcements. Malakar abandoned Corvina's body and lunged for Calyx. The two men clashed in a brutal dance of steel and fury, uncle and nephew fighting for the throne their family had torn apart. Sonara scrambled for Corvina's fallen knife. Her hands were shaking, but she'd never been more certain of anything in her life. The guards advanced on her. She backed against the wall, blade raised. Stay back! One of them laughed. What's the little queen going to do? Poke us? She didn't have to answer. An arrow sprouted from his chest, and he crumpled. Gavrin burst through the door, bow in hand, a dozen soldiers behind him. Secure the room, he bellowed. The king! But Sonara was already watching. Calyx and Malakar fought like wolves, all teeth and desperation. Calyx was younger, faster, but Malakar had decades of experience and no honor to slow him down. He fought dirty, aiming for eyes and throat and groin. A feint, a slash. Blood bloomed on Calyx's arm. You're weak, Malakar snarled. Just like your father. Sentimental fools who couldn't do what was necessary. My father believed in mercy, Calyx panted. Something you'll never understand. Mercy? Malakar laughed. Mercy is what gets kings killed. He pressed his advantage, driving Calyx back toward the tower window. One more step, and he'd fall to the stones below. Sonara didn't think. She threw the knife. It wasn't a perfect throw, not even close, but it caught Malakar's shoulder, spinning him off balance just long enough for Calyx to recover. One strike, clean and certain. Malakar looked down at the blade in his chest with something like surprise. You... Blood bubbled at his lips. You let a woman save you. No. Calyx pulled the sword free, and his uncle crumpled. My queen saved us both. He crossed the room to Sonara on unsteady legs. Blood dripped from a dozen wounds, and exhaustion etched every line of his face. You threw a knife for me, he said, something like wonder in his voice. You were about to die. I improvised. It was the worst throw I've ever seen. It worked. He laughed, broken, exhausted, and alive, and pulled her into his arms. Sonara held him while the soldiers secured the tower and the fires below were finally extinguished. Held him while the reality settled in. Malachar was dead. Corvina was dead. The war they'd been preparing for was over before it truly began. And somewhere in the chaos, she'd stopped pretending. This wasn't an alliance anymore. It was love. 3 days later, the kingdom was still reeling. Malachar's forces had scattered after their leader's death, most surrendering rather than facing execution. The nobles who'd secretly supported him scrambled to swear renewed loyalty to Calyx, their faces pale with fear. Sonara watched it all from the council table, exhausted but present. When the last petitioner had been dismissed and the doors finally closed, Calyx turned to her. Walk with me. They went to the balcony, their balcony, where everything had changed. Your father has sent a message, Calyx said quietly. He's claiming credit for placing a suitable bride and requesting increased trade concessions as reward for Greymoor's loyalty. Sonara laughed bitterly. Of course he is. I also received word about Lysara. Calyx hesitated. She's in the coastal territories with her stable hand. They married last month. She wants nothing to do with Greymoor or Valdmere. Something loosened in Sonara's chest. Her sister was safe, free, living the life she'd chosen. Good, she said softly. She deserves that. Calyx took her hands in his. The year we agreed on isn't finished. You could still leave, take the gold, start over somewhere your father can never find you. His voice was steady, but she felt his fingers tremble. I meant what I said about choice, Sonara. I won't trap you. She looked at him, this man who'd been painted as a monster but carried his guilt like a wound. This king who'd given her purpose, who'd seen her when she'd been invisible, who'd held her through nightmares and kissed her like she was precious. I don't want your gold, she said. His face fell. I understand. I'll arrange transport. I don't want to leave either. He stopped breathing. When I walked down that aisle, Sonara continued, I was terrified. I thought I was marrying a monster, trading one cage for another. Instead, I found... She searched for words. I found a partner. Someone who trusts me, respects me, makes me feel like I matter. Someone I've fallen stupidly, inconveniently in love with. Sonara, I choose you. She squeezed his hands. Not because I have to, not because of treaties or bargains or threats. Because when I imagine my future, you're in it. All of it. Calyx pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I love you, he breathed. I've loved you since you told me you'd rather face a wolf than run from one. Since you memorized defense networks just to be useful. Since you threw the worst knife in history and saved my life anyway. She laughed through tears. It wasn't that bad. It was terrible. He kissed her forehead. But it was perfect. The bonding ceremony took place under a full moon, 1 month after Malachar's defeat. Sonara wore silver instead of white. A deliberate choice. A break from tradition. She wasn't the bride her father had sold or the shadow of her sister. She was something new. Something her own. The throne room overflowed with witnesses. Lords who'd doubted her, servants who'd befriended her, Gavrin standing at Calyx's side like a proud brother. Even Velith wept openly in the front row. Calyx waited at the altar, and when Sonara appeared, his expression made every hardship worth it. He looked at her like she'd hung the stars. The vows were traditional, but the words felt new on her tongue. I choose you as my partner, my equal, my home. I choose you, Calyx echoed, as my conscience, my courage, my queen. When he kissed her, the roar of approval shook the rafters. Later, much later, they stood on their balcony watching the celebration below. Tell me something, Calyx said, his arms wrapped around her from behind. Something I don't know. Sonara thought for a moment. When I was 8, I wished on a falling star that someone would choose me someday. Not settle for me, not use me. Choose me. I stopped believing it could happen a long time ago. And now? She turned in his arms, her hands finding his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palms. Now I think some wishes just take longer than others. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, with the promise of forever behind it. You're mine, he murmured against her lips, no longer a claim of ownership, but a declaration of belonging, a promise freely given and joyfully received. Yours, she agreed, and you're mine. They held each other as the moon rose higher. Sonara thought about the woman she'd been, invisible, trapped, certain she'd never escape her father's shadow. That woman had walked down an aisle expecting doom. Instead, she'd found a king who saw her worth, a kingdom that needed her strength, a love that felt like coming home. She'd stepped into her sister's place at the altar, but the life she'd built was entirely her own, and when Calyx tilted her chin and smiled down at her, the same gesture that had once felt like a threat, she smiled back, free, chosen, and exactly where she belonged. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts. And if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories.